Hello and welcome to Number by Color. I'm Todd, and on this episode of Let Me Tell You About Games I've Recently Played, I'm going to be talking about The Alliance Alive HD Remastered for Nintendo Switch. This game has been on my radar since it released for the 3DS in 2018, yet I never got a chance to play it. As luck would have it, a console remaster has come our way. But is the game I've been wanting to play for the last year and a half as good as I hoped it would be? Well, yes, it is. But also, it's not. Let's break it down. As usual, I won't be spoiling the story, and all the footage is from the first 10 hours of the game. Developed by Cattle Call, with help from Grezzo and Furyu, The Alliance Alive is a turn-based JRPG that was originally released in America on the Nintendo 3DS in March of 2018. The HD remaster was published by NIS in America and released in October 2019, boasting upgraded HD visuals and a reworked UI. Even though I played on the Nintendo Switch, the remaster is also available on PlayStation 4 and will be released on Steam in January 2020. The story of The Alliance Alive is interesting, but not necessarily because of the story itself, but because of the way it's presented. The premise is simple. Demons split the world up hundreds of years ago, there hasn't been a blue sky since, and now the human population is more or less being controlled by the beast folk who work for the demons. It's a simple enough concept to grasp, and the nice thing about the game is that it doesn't take too long to set up the story, and it pretty much lets you start playing within the first 15 minutes. But even though things start out interesting enough, there is unfortunately not enough meat on the bone to sustain it, but more on that in a minute. Before I get to any story shortcomings, I want to talk about the unique way this game introduces its 9 main characters. That's right, there are 9 characters. At the start, we're introduced to Galil and Azura, 2 friends from the town of Svalna. The game does a pretty good job at establishing their personalities and friendship dynamics by making them the central focus instead of the plot. This helps us develop a connection with these characters more quickly, which is good because that really helped me stay invested until the end. To my surprise, pretty much every new main character that is introduced is given the time they need to establish who they are as a person, as well as show at least some level of motivation for why they're doing what they're doing. With 9 main characters, I appreciate this game's ability to make each of them stand out in their own way. Unfortunately, once the full team is assembled, many aspects of the game start showing their weaknesses. When it comes to the story, there were still enough interesting things happening to keep me wanting to play, but it never quite reached the level it had in the beginning. In fact, after the first 6 or 7 hours, much of the game's general plot becomes repetitive. Travel to a new place to destroy an ancient artifact. Do this about 5 times and the game is over. To be fair, that is definitely an oversimplification of the story, and I actually did enjoy it for what it was, but I really wanted to be a little more surprised with how the events unfolded, especially with how much I appreciated the first handful of chapters. Fortunately, when the presentation of the story was starting to show its flaws, the JRPG gameplay was there to pick up the slack. Kind of. Combat in The Alliance Alive is at first reminiscent of classic turn-based battle systems any old-school RPG fan looks for, but dig a little deeper, and you'll find a fairly complex, if not somewhat overcomplicated, set of battle mechanics to play around with. It harkens to Square Enix's Saga series. There's a surprising amount of depth to battles, but I'll do my best to simplify the basics. As I mentioned, battles are turn-based. Your party of up to 5 members is organized on a 3x5 grid and, depending on your character's positions on the grid, they may receive certain benefits, such as increased attack power, increased defense, increased healing potential, and other bonuses. Finding the right tactical formations for battles adds a nice level of strategy, especially during tough boss fights. And speaking of strategy, this is the kind of RPG where you input all your character's actions at the beginning of each turn, and then let the round unfold. The order of actions depends on character and enemy speed, so you'll need to be strategic about predicting whether or not to heal, guard, or give a full-on assault. Be aware, however, that there are no traditional experience points in this game, and your characters do not have character levels. Instead, characters have a chance of their HP or SP increasing after battles. This may seem odd, but in a way it's somewhat freeing, because it reduces the feeling of needing to continuously grind for levels. The primary skill system, which was instantly my favorite part of the game's combat, is one that isn't used enough in RPGs, in my opinion. Essentially, you can choose to equip every character with any of the 8 or so weapon types, and every weapon type has its own set of skills to learn and master. This is exactly what I love in RPGs. For example, say I want Galil to use a spear. Every time I use the base spear attack in battle, there is a chance he will have what is called an awakening and unlock a new spear ability. For his next turn, I can now choose to use the base attack again, which may possibly result in yet another awakening, or I can use the new ability I just learned. In most cases, new abilities will deal more damage, but learning new abilities is just so tempting that it was always fun trying to strategize. And some abilities even have special effects, like attacking multiple enemies at a time or lowering an enemy's defense, so learning new abilities always feels rewarding. Another cool aspect of this system is that depending on where in the battle grid your character is, you will increase the proficiency of your abilities as you use them. So not only are you debating between trying to learn new abilities or using abilities you already know, you have to decide which abilities you want to use most so that they can get stronger when you use them. And here's the kicker: you can do this with every weapon, with every character. With rare exception, every character is able to use every weapon type, so there is almost an endless amount of grinding and ability leveling you can do if you want to. With that being said, this game unfortunately has one weapon type in particular that is basically way overpowered by the end game, which means that if you can get every character decently proficient in that one weapon, you can do pretty well for yourself. Still, it's fun learning abilities for every weapon, and it's a good idea to have a variety of weapons present in any given situation. Even though there aren't traditional character levels, there are still incentives to fighting battles. In addition to increasing HP or SP, every battle also rewards you with talent points. You can use these points to unlock character upgrades, mostly in the form of increased weapon proficiency. There are talents that increase your chances of learning new abilities, reducing the SP cost of abilities you already know, automatically restoring SP when it gets low, and even some that will reduce the cost of items in shops. I really like systems like these. Sadly, this game gives you such a small amount of talent points in every battle that it takes forever to get enough to learn new talents once you've unlocked the basics. This is frustrating because I want to love this battle system so much, but this aspect alone often makes fighting feel so tedious. Actually, that's not true. There's one other thing that makes fighting unnecessarily frustrating. You hardly earn any money from battles. I'm not sure why it was designed this way, but it is almost impossible to grind for money in this game, which means you have to be very conservative with purchases, and I frequently found myself not being able to afford getting new armor and weapons for everybody in my party, especially late in the game. This might not have been a problem if the characters leveled up, but they don't, so they never got stronger except for getting new weapons and armor. It didn't ruin my experience, but it definitely made things annoying at times, mainly during the handful of boss battles that are super difficult if you're not prepared. The last major gameplay mechanic are the titular alliances. Throughout the game, you get the ability to recruit some of the people you meet into one of 5 guilds: the Blacksmith, Synomancy, Tactics, Library, and Recon guilds. Each guild specializes in something different, and as you recruit new members, the guilds will level up, which means the benefits they provide increase. You get to choose which recruits should join which guilds, and that provides a good amount of flexibility for how those guilds grow over time. Remember when I said you earn minuscule amounts of talent points after each battle? Well, if you level up the Recon guild enough, you'll start earning bonus talent points. I wish I'd realized this earlier in the game because this would have really come in handy. As a final note on gameplay mechanics, I should mention that there are 2 different kinds of New Game Plus options. Basically, the first option lets you start the game overpowered with all your items and abilities, and the second option takes everything away but gives you a ton of extra talent points to use early on. It's clear that this game was designed to be played through at least a second time, as starting a second playthrough unlocks even more recruitable guild members. I don't have a lot to say about the art of this game except that I found it to be really nice. Character models look crisp, environments have a storybook charm to them, and there is a huge improvement over the original 3DS assets, in every instance. I'm a big fan of the character models, and the towns remind me of a pop-up book. It's really pleasing to look at. Even the UI is clean and uncluttered. It's easy to navigate and understand how the menus work. The music in the game is also really strong. There's a diverse mix of upbeat tracks ranging from classic fantasy to Middle Eastern to straight rock. It's engaging and it fits well where it's used. My only complaint with the sound in the game is that there is no voice acting. I know this is a remaster of a 3DS game, but that's not really a good excuse. I don't even need it throughout the whole game. I'm fine with most of the normal dialogue being silent, because that's what I grew up with, but there are some cutscenes that play automatically, and if you're not reading fast enough, you might miss what's being said. Granted, you can restart or pause those cutscenes, but I found it a little odd to include them without voiced dialogue. Despite any negatives I mentioned throughout this review, I came out of this experience with a net positive overall feeling. Sure, some of the battle mechanics got under my skin, and the pacing could have been a little better, but I still really enjoyed the roughly 30 hours I spent with the game. The frustrations I had with the game didn't cancel out the fun I got out of the battle system. And let's be honest, RPGs are made or broken by the combat. This game does some things wrong, but in my opinion, it does enough right to warrant giving it a shot. And even if the story isn't super complex, it's good enough to see it through. This is probably the most niche game I've reviewed so far, but I love RPGs. They're my favorite genre. And I'll gladly spend my time reviewing games that I choose to play, even if they're not necessarily the most popular. Have you played this game? What did you think? Let's talk about it in the comments, because I'm almost certain I won't know anybody else who has played this game. But that's enough for me for today. Thank you for watching. I'll be back soon with more game thoughts, but until then, farewell.